So like I said, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us and being in this space this evening. This event brings together survivors of sexual violence to share their experiences of disclosing. We have 4 survivors who will be helping us to understand how to respond supportively when someone discloses that they were sexually assaulted, and this session will be recorded. Tonight, we will hear from Audrey, Angela, Veronica, and Ginny. The format of this event is going to be, we'll have one survivor speaking and sharing their experience, followed by audience and engagement questions. So we will ask you to be participating. This evening, we're going to be keeping ourselves muted, except for our panelists, so you can be responding in the chat. And I just want to kind of lay a few ground rules for participation this evening. So first and foremost, thank you so much for taking time out of your lives this evening to be here. We really appreciate it. And we want to welcome you into the space. This is intended to be a space for healing, growth. Every single one of us is impacted by sexual violence in some way, whether we are a survivor ourselves or we know somebody. Please feel free throughout this evening to type supportive messages and resources in the chat. And note that any negative comments will be deleted and you may be removed from the meeting. Tonight's session will consist of hearing from our speakers for about 10 minutes. And after each speaker speaks, we'll have about 5 minutes to facilitate some dialogue. So like I said, please be engaged as you can. And we ask that you respond to anything in the chat box. And then although we wish everyone could be included and allowed in today's session, we want our speakers to have your undivided attention. So at 6:15, no more participants will be allowed into the Zoom call. If you lose connection or something, this will be recorded and be posted on our social media. The stories that you hear this evening will be shared directly from survivors who have experienced sexual violence. We know these topics can be triggering and upsetting to some. And if you need to talk to anybody, then we have staff members here that are here to support you. So please feel free to reach out to Kirsten or Kirsten, or they're spelled the same this evening. And then as always, our 24-hour hotline is available to anyone tonight. And that phone number is 1-855-435-7827. And these will all be copied and pasted into periodically throughout the evening if you need that number. I also want to invite you, if you feel comfortable, to turn on your video just to support our survivors who are sharing. It's not required, but just to be able to have a space to who's listening in. And now Angela is going to do a brief STAR 101 for us.
Thank you, Alexis. So thank y'all again for joining us here tonight. We're going to just share a little bit more information if you aren't familiar with STAR. Our mission is to serve survivors, improve systems response, and create social change to end sexual violence. We envision a community free from oppression and sexual violence, and that is rooted heavily in the work that we do. We originally started as the Rape Crisis Center in 1975 in partnership or connection with the DA's office in Baton Rouge. However, in 2012, we incorporated into a nonprofit agency to be able to expand our services to survivors. And then we were able to grow into the New Orleans and Alexandria office, our area. And with that, we are able to cover 15 parishes. Those parishes, and I'm gonna go through them because I want everyone to know where services are available. East and West Baton Rouge Parish, East and West Feliciana, Iberville, Point Capee, Ascension, and Livingston, as well as Orleans, Jefferson, and St. Tammany, Avoyelles, Rapides, Vernon, and Grant. And we believe that every survivor has the right to confidential services, regardless of their background, gender, race, ethnicity, ability, financial status, gender identity, immigration status, or their decision to report. We provide services to survivors and their loved ones. Some of those services are broken down into 3 distinct programs. They include advocacy, counseling, and legal. Services include a 24/7 hotline, which is available for support and assistance and can be reached at 1-855-435-STAR. We also provide hospital advocacy, legal and criminal justice advocacy, representation in civil legal matters, case management, application assistance for address confidentiality and crime victim reparations, safety planning, individual counseling, and support groups. And we also provide services to survivors of child sexual abuse as well. We provide counseling services for kids as well. And that's just a brief overview of STAR, our agency. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me directly.
Thank you, Angela. So we are about to begin the part of the session where we'll be hearing from survivors. So we will no longer be allowing people to come in and out of the chat. Like I said earlier, if you do lose connection, this will be posted on social media in the future. All right, so our first speaker tonight is going to be Audrey. Audrey, can you unmute yourself? Okay.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So can you tell us about a time that you've disclosed your assault and what that response was like?
So, first, thank you for having me tonight. I'm Audrey. I wrote some notes because I've talked about this hundreds and hundreds of times, but I've never done it on a Zoom, and I'm easily distracted. But I'm a survivor of major sexual trauma. My grandfather tried to murder me as a child. He raped me and damaged my body so bad that my bladder no longer works the way it should. And I use catheters, and I have to take medication for it. My grandparents were very wealthy and very involved in their community. And so they lived in another state. They, just were beloved by the community. So like, who better than to send your kid to spend their summers with, on a Florida beach. So when my family found out, my parents, specifically my family, imploded, but they had already put me into therapy for years, because when I was 7 years old, I had started to starve myself. So not one of those therapists mentioned to my parents that maybe something traumatic was going on. They told my parents to get rid of my Barbies because that was what was affecting my body image. I fell off of a bike during this. Well, I went to, I had to go to the ER. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm reading my notes. I had to go to the ER because I had previously fallen off of a bike, but I had never had vaginal bleeding. Okay. Well, several months later, when I went to the ER for vaginal bleeding, the ER told my parents it was because I had fallen off of a bike and broken my hymen. But because I had fallen off of a bike before, it was not a red flag. I had repeated yeast infections. Multiple doctors told my parents it was allergies and that they should change my laundry detergent, and that would fix it. No more baths, showers only. So there was just, and I had skin allergies. So like with both of those situations, there was just enough prior experiences for my parents to easily dismiss the vaginal bleeding and the yeast infections because I had fallen off of a bike before. I had eczema on different parts of my body. So both of those, it was kind of like, okay, well, the doctors are saying this, right? I had been a straight A student in the gifted program until then. It was, and my family imploded when I was 12 years old because of it. My parents moved several states away in order to protect me and my safety and my brother and myself. And to this day, I have family members that feel like I should have looked the other way. Blood is thicker than water. it couldn't have really been that bad were a lot of the comments. Do you think that maybe she misunderstood with some of the other comments? And some of these were witnesses to the abuse. I started doing terrible in school. I had a chemistry teacher I had been a straight A student up until this, and started failing. I started, I hadn't quite gotten to the D yet. I was still like dressed like I was failing tests. And on my 17th birthday, I was raped, and I started doing drugs, and I started failing all of my classes. Well, the same chemistry teacher, the highest grade I made on the test one time was a D. And he was like, I mean, it's just, school's not for everybody. Like, just very dismissive. Like, I ended up doing so well in chemistry in college, I was a tutor. And I ran into that teacher and another teacher later on, and they were both surprised and told me that they were surprised that I did anything with my life. At the time, I got admitted to a mental health facility because my weight had dropped to 68 pounds and my hair was falling out. My parents got a phone call in the middle of the night from the facility that because I had been placed in an adult program because my problems were deemed too traumatic for other children to hear, I had inadvertently been placed in a support group with pedophiles. So my parents saved my life. They just kept going and going until they found someone to help me. But I tell y'all all of these steps to say that it's been almost 30 years since my 17th birthday, and it's never the act of violence that's the messiest part. It is the aftermath. Like, I had to build my life back up. And a lot of it has to do with the support and the non-support of my peers. The guy that raped me came from a good family. He was a good Christian. He would never do that. It's so dismissive. Even now, like I can't believe that people said that to me. I want to talk though about the good things that people have said to me, because even though I've had a lot of people that were really rude or very uncomfortable, the most impactful and meaningful statements to me have been made out of empathy and not pity. And I think that that's really something to be very self-aware of when someone discloses to you. My parents have been amazing, and I remember at one point apologizing to them because I felt like I had ruined our family. And my mom stopped me. She said, "Don't ever apologize." She's like, "You're not the one that needs to apologize here." And like, for me, that was what I needed to hear from them. My husband, the reason I married him is he was the first man that didn't try to change me. And when I disclosed to him, and he's a physician, so like he knows, like when I had to start using catheters, like he knew probably more than an average person the damage that had been done to my body. He said, "It doesn't change the way I feel about you, and I'm going to do whatever I can do to support you." So he didn't view me any differently, and I needed to hear that. But I am a writer. That's what I do for a living. And one of the other things that I've noticed, a lot of people disclose after major media events surrounding sexual assault. So I've written for major outlets about Brock Turner, Harvey Weinstein, and every single time people will come, send me messages, send me emails. I've never disclosed this to anybody, and I've been holding this secret for 20 years. And But what I've also noticed that when that happens, and if I see the comments or people in my timeline that don't believe it or they think it's opportunistic, it is the most disheartening thing to somebody in your life that maybe has never disclosed, and very damaging. So you might never realize that you have shut somebody down because you might have been the one person they would have come to. And the people that you're talking about in your timeline, they're never going to hear what you have to say about that. But the people in your life that are affected by this, they will. And, you know, I don't know if y'all have any questions or it's a lot of information condensed.
Audrey, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself. I really appreciate it. I know that we all do who are listening. And I think one thing that really stuck out to me is you saying that it's the aftermath that stuck with you, and folks' responses following not only the violent event that happened, but the aftermath. But
yeah,
thank you.
and I want to go back to a couple like the I talk a lot about this, like with the people that I know, that it's like the systemic failures, right? But that if your gut is telling you something, then you need to ask.
Yeah.
You know, I think about, I mean, I have 2 children now, and I think about how many nurses and doctors and interventionists and teachers and all these people that my kids see. And I think about my parents who knew something was wrong but didn't exactly know. Multiple nurses in an ER, multiple doctors on multiple occasions, and so many missed opportunities. And if it wasn't for my parents having this, like, I know something is wrong, like that unease, like your gut is telling you something for a reason and you should listen to it. So that's, I think but it's the messiest part is the aftermath, and the hardest. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story and for what you've said tonight. You just got a comment in the chat box as well from Bianca, thanking you for what you've said tonight. And I also just want to open it up now to people who are listening. If anybody wants to share what stood out to you about Audrey's experience, or anything that you can learn and take away, and you can just go ahead and chat it, put it in the chat box. One comment is, Audrey, thank you for sharing. Lots of people say that the timeline is victim to survivor. This is a great timeline. At the same time, I'd like to add victim to survivor to thriver to activist. Thank you so much for sharing.
well, thank you. Yeah, it's I don't think some of the people that you're going to hear tonight, I think everybody's path to becoming, you know, I hate to use the word healed. My parents use the term, I can't think of what the term is, the Japanese vases that break and then they fill in with gold in the cracks. And my parents have always told me that that's how they view me, is that the scars are there, but like I've been able to make my life beautiful. And I think the advice that I would give to anybody is that, like, it's you have to walk through hell to get better.
Yeah.
But it is so worth it. I mean, there were days that, I mean, I think anybody can say this, like sometimes it's like, God, is this worth it? But it's like, looking back, I'm like so grateful that my parents got me the help I needed. But so yeah, if it feels like you're in hell, just keep on going, and it gets better.
Some final thoughts from the chat box. Lauren said, thank you for sharing the trust your gut. Oop, it just moved. Oh man, you're getting so many. Thank you for sharing. The trust your gut thing really resonated with me this evening. Your comments made me think about how I'd react if family and people I trust questioned whether I'd be misunderstood or if it was really that bad. It's so hard to disclose in the first place, but those reactions would make me question if I'd done the right thing by telling. And there's some more in there too. But
I'll take a look.
yeah, thank you so much for sharing this evening. And now I'm gonna ask if Angela, do you mind unmuting yourself?
I did.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for being here this evening. So Angela, we have the same question for you. Do you mind telling us about a time when you disclosed your assaults and what that response was like?
Yeah, there's so many layers to my story, but I'm a survivor of a multiple offender rape. I was 17, a senior in high school, and while my parents didn't know, I was on Bourbon Street with friends, and I met a tall football collegiate from Tulane, and he had his friends there, and I drank alcohol, and I ended up unconscious, and in there all back then in 1984, it was an all-male dorm, and they were many in the room. I get nervous when I talk about that part. I'm sorry. They, at that point in my life, I hadn't seen many images of the male body part, but that night, having one hurting me and then seeing another one ready and prepared is enmeshed in my mind forever. It's a traumatic moment. It's really the very few memories I have of that night. I remembered the one who betrayed me. I remembered his eyes, and that led to me finding them because, and back up a little bit, I felt so powerless and degraded when I woke up and they all, of course, fled the room and left me to get dressed in front of other boys, which was, who wants to do that at 17? And, I was in shock, and I couldn't find a shoe. And so I was 5 hours past my curfew, and I knew that I had to go home to my mom and dad. And luckily, they wanted to bring me home because I guess they couldn't imagine leaving a young girl stranded on their campus. So they made sure that I gave them directions and I made it home. It was an awful ride there. And I don't really remember too much about that night with my mom and dad. That interaction was later confirmed by my mother 35 years later. My mom and dad were 34 and 36 at the time. And they remembered every detail. It's amazing the trauma that they went through. I got married in 2004, and there were things about my wedding my dad can't remember, and my mom too when we laugh about it, but they actually had their own trauma all these years, and I didn't even know it. So I decided, and I never thought I would ever tell them. I told no one. I was humiliated, and I didn't want anyone to know that I had put myself, or I allowed myself, because I thought they looked like really good guys. They went to a really good school, so they must be of high integrity, I guess I thought. And little did I know just how gullible I was. No one ever told me that boys would do something like that. I didn't know. We didn't talk about things like that back then, especially at an all-girls Catholic school. And so I thought, well, I'll just forget about it. Once the bruising healed, I thought, okay, I can forget about it and move on. But little did I know, I robbed myself of so much by not telling my mom and dad or someone else. I needed medical care. I needed mental health. So I spent 34 years living my life without that mental health. Every doctor that I visited, no one ever asked me if I ever had any trauma in my life, for different things. I was struggling to be a divorced single mother, and I couldn't even do that effectively. And I will never get those days back to mother my child the right way. It's so hard to maintain your own self-esteem. And then when you're damaged, like I thought I was, it's even harder to parent your child. Anyway, in 2018, the media and everything was ripe with sexual assault and the Kavanaugh trial. And I was so triggered by that. I had been triggered before, but again, I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. I just thought, I'll take that to my grave. And this was just within this decade. But in 2018, it was overwhelming, the triggers. And there was this 17-year-old inside me screaming. She wanted to be heard. I felt like I wanted to be a part of this statistic. My story deserved to be a part of it. I had no idea that I would ever find them, know their names. I couldn't remember their names. I had no idea that my mom and dad would ever know. And that has all come to fruition. And when I did report to my detective in New Orleans, I remember, I was so emotional and I was so upset when he asked me if I knew their names. I had no idea how. I think I yelled at him and said, I was probably in diapers when this happened to you. And I was just so angry. And I didn't know their names. I didn't want to remember, I guess. And he gave me resources and I called STAR immediately. And they have been part of my journey that I don't know where or I would be without, like, Alex and Portia. I remember the days when Portia would ask me, how does it look like to you? What if you decide not to tell your parents? You could be okay. And I had to answer that like, yeah, I guess it would be okay if I didn't tell them, but now she knows, I'm sure she's aware that we were all needing to be healed, but none of us knew that. And, and then when Alex asked me, what does justice look like for you? I was so emotional because it was 6 months had passed and I was so desperate to find them. I spent money trying to find them. I couldn't remember where they were from. It was awful, but it seemed so invalidating not knowing their names, not knowing who they were, not being able to have that part on my police report. It was important to me. It was, it was what I needed for not just closure, because I don't know if we ever get that, but my path to peace, it meant I needed to know who they were because I wanted them to know 35 years later where I have been and what my life was like. And, the day that happened with Alex, I drove home and I live on the North Shore. So I had to drive across the lake and I sobbed the entire way there and got stopped by the police. And on the causeway, and I was crying so hard that, and when the man asked me, "Are you okay?" I cried even more. And anyway, I didn't get a ticket, but it just taught me the kindness of other people sometimes, and showing emotion, which I had never done before, was, it helped in ways. And so I'll never forget that man. Anyway, then I decided that I would Google for the millionth time on Google, like Tulane football 1984, and a program came up. And I said, I wonder if their faces or names would be in that book. And I ordered them off eBay from 1983 through 85. And there, on the night of April 4th, 2019, I found them. And I found the main one. It was his eyes that gave it away. And so here I am 6 months later, and I know them. My mom and dad already, I finally felt like I had to disclose to them. And it was awful when my mom sobbed because she was angry that she and my dad didn't follow their gut, because they knew, here I am disheveled, no one shoe. But I kept saying I was okay. And I was persistent about that. No, I'm fine. It's amazing how you put on this, I don't know, this facade that you're okay, you're embarrassed. And at 17, you want to protect your character, your, integrity, and I couldn't, so my mom and dad and I started the healing process together, and that has been wonderful. And they, so once I found them, I sent to the main guy a picture of myself at 17, and he remembered. And he remembered all the details, and I was not prepared for them. I don't regret it. I don't regret ever finding them. I was so happy that I was able to send them my victim impact statements. He told me the names of his other friends involved, and I found them too. And I went on this, I went into detective mode, and I was actually able to send them 2 victim impact statements, and that felt really good. He also said those words all in a text message. I've had you in my mind forever. He apologized. I'm glad I got that. I probably could have done without the details. So here I am at that time, 52, and struggling with those details that I was unprepared for, like, oh, they threw your shoe out the window. And I'm so angry about that. It was my shoe. And I lost my balance that night, and it was gone for a really long time. And so I guess that makes me whole. And because they took, not only did they take my power away, my voice, and they abused my body, they took my shoe. And anyway, I didn't get justice in the end, the kind I wanted, but I got the justice that I needed. And that was healing through my parents, my family and friends. And I'm better for it.
Angela, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I think that what I heard from you and also from Audrey earlier is just the way that sometimes our systems disappoint us in so many ways. And that's a light statement. And, you know, and just trying to find other avenues for what justice can look like, and what healing can look like. And thank you for sharing that with us. I saw a lot of reactions while you were sharing. I think you got a lot of us. And I also just am really thinking about that statement, my story deserved to be a part of it, that you said. And just thank you again for taking that time and the emotional energy to share your story tonight. And I'm wondering if anybody has anything to share about what stood out to you about Angela's experiences or what they can take away. Destiny in the chat.
Alexis, I was going to say, looking in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of people sharing and recognizing that justice looks different for everyone.
True. It surely does. Can I say one thing? Alexis, I can say something?
Yes.
I know that in the end, because law enforcement, well, I felt like I was going to be part of the Me Too movement. He thought I would be part of that, you know, wanting the notoriety. I think I surprised everybody when I found them and actually had the proof. Because without that, like I said, it was invalidating. But what he told me was because I called the Supreme Court myself, I wanted to know the rape laws from 1984 versus 85. And in 1985 was the year that multiple offenders became an aggravating circumstance, giving it no statute of limitations. So I missed justice by that year. And that was hard. And what my detective said, or like I said, it sounded so scripted when people said to me, it's okay that you waited to report. You reported when you were ready. But I didn't find that so consoling because I had to grieve that 35 years of suppression meant a laundry list of medical issues, health issues, or, you know, that still go on today. So it's not okay. It wasn't okay for me. It may be for someone else, but it wasn't okay for me to wait. I felt like that was a really sad time for me.
Yeah, Angela, you shared that we had a dress rehearsal earlier this week, and you talked about that. And I think it just kind of shows and is humbling for everyone in terms of our staff members don't always get it right. The people who do this every day don't get it right always. And just kind of the importance of continuing to educate ourselves and continuing to kind of check in and making sure that we can be the best responses, and also that sometimes nothing in that moment can be said that's right. And yeah. And I want to just, again, Angela, thank you so much for sharing yourself tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just kind of want to remind everyone that what we're hearing tonight is intense, and we all have our own backgrounds and our own experiences. So please feel free to take care of yourself throughout this evening. If you need to grab water, turn your camera off for a moment, please feel free to do so throughout. Just take care of yourself. And we do have the Kirsten and Kirsten team tonight. So if you need to talk to them directly or use our hotline, you're welcome. And so now we have our third presenter, or Veronica. Do you mind unmuting yourself?
Good evening.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Veronica, would you mind telling us about a time that you disclosed your guilt and what that response was like?
I'm going to tell, well, let me give a little background about myself. My trauma came from incestuous abuse. And for those that may not know what incestuous abuse, that is abuse by a close loved one. That loved one for me was my birth father, not adopted, my birth father. My abuse from my memory started at the age of 5. And it lasted until 2004, the night of my wedding. So that was over 28 years of my life that I experienced that trauma. And some people may be wondering, well, why did you stay so long? Well, after gaslighting and everything else, that's what I was taught. So that was my normal, even though it didn't feel normal. I was an overachiever. So my teachers really didn't notice these things because I was on an honor roll. I participated in different organizations. I volunteered a lot, like in Key Club. So I did a lot of service work. So they really didn't notice different signs starting at an early age. However, that was a sign. They just didn't know it. My abuser was also a minister. So we stayed in the church. I began to question God. How could he let this happen to me? I didn't know who I can turn to. So my reporting came later. In fact, the first person that I actually told was my husband, but it was the night of our wedding. That's when he found out. So I didn't know if he was going to stay or if he would leave. And he stayed. He told me that night that I love you. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. And that's a hard thing because I loved him, but I loved him enough that he needed to know the truth because I knew in 2002, prior to that, I had tried to take my life. I didn't know if I would try it again or not because of the thoughts that was in there. I had bladder problems too. I stayed with yeast infections. My insides were so messed up. They told me that I would never have children. And God allowed me to birth 3. And then I was able to adopt my little girl. So that night of reporting for me was unnerving. It was scary, but it was just the snippet. Because later on with that, my husband actually confronted him because of he molested me and my sister. So both of our husbands confronted him. And for the moment, he held strong that he did nothing. And then he broke down. Well, I was shifted into reporting again, and I didn't have no plans on it after I found out he had messed with my little cousin. And I felt it needed to stop because it was carrying on, because this specific little cousin was placed in this area after being molested by someone when she was 5. And so she was traumatized all over again. And I'm like, somebody got to stop. So I decided to go report. I didn't tell my husband I was going to the police when I made my statement. When I went to the police to tell them, I didn't know that her grandmother had already filed a statement. So when it started coming out and they actually picked him up, of course, by being family and him being a well-known minister, I had ministers telling me, well, why you didn't come to me? Well, why you didn't say this? I had those that, of course, didn't believe it. I had family members that told me that I could go to jail for lying. But I knew I had to speak my truth. And I had to stand because it needed to stop. And I knew I was worth more than that. I didn't feel like it because I had been misused for so long, but I knew something had to come out of this. At least she could live, even if I felt my life was worthless. So after reporting, and my victim's advocate was Keely Marino. That's my angel. She was there every step of the way with me. In fact, another family member came out of retirement because they had another minister at that time that had molested a family member, and both of those cases was out, but they made sure mine didn't hit the news. I don't know how they did it, but they did. Dealing with sexual trauma from anyone is horrible. And just like my fellow thriver, not just survivor, Audrey, when it's from a loved one who's supposed to protect you, that's like putting gasoline, diesel, and everything just on the fire and just making you feel like you want to explode, in my opinion. Now I've written a book and I tell my story for others. Because of people, I want people to know that no matter what people tell you, no matter what they may tell you about not reporting or when you report or how you, it's your path, it's your journey. And I want them to understand that when I was reporting and when I told the responses about people telling me that I can go to jail, I just held strong. I went through lots of therapy, inpatient therapy, outpatient therapy, hypnotherapy. I'm still in therapy. But my truth now is now I'm becoming a therapist because I know the importance of having someone to listen to you. Because sometimes you don't want someone to say anything. You just want them to listen. And I want to offer this to you all. When you speaking your truth, if somebody is saying something, that just say, please just listen. It's okay to tell. You have to, I learned I had to teach people how I wanted to be treated. Because that was taken out. I never knew how to do that. But now, even with dealing with my children, but because of that, because for the first, my oldest child, for the first 8 or 9 years of his life, I was emotionally unavailable for him because I would go out like everything was fine. I put on this mask. Every day I was a choir director. I did these things, but inside I was broken and I felt like I was just crumbling. And I didn't know how to put on my own oxygen mask. But now with me going through this, I say me being emotionally available now to me is more important because now I'm able to walk him through the same trauma, well, the same mental challenges that I have are similar because I have PTSD, bipolar depression, anxiety, a whole bunch of things, ADHD, and I can relate to my children because now he has bipolar depression. So I'm using some of the snippets of my life to tell him, this is how you put on your oxygen mask. And I see the growth. So even though we all go through various pressures, just remember that it takes pressure to make a diamond. And we all gonna shine. Because every diamond is unique. And so we all unique. Our stories are unique. But our stories matter because we matter. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Veronica. I really found myself just kind of getting sucked into your words because you're so eloquent, and I know that your book is probably amazing. And thank you for telling us about your story. And I'm so happy that you're able to now be working to become are you currently a therapist or are you on your way?
I'm on my way. I'm a life coach. I went to school. I'm a master's in life coaching. However, due to me working with youth and families, dealing specifically with this type of gook, I needed more. And so I'm back in school to get my more.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that that's where your path led you, and your clients and your future clients are so lucky, and your kids. I think that the survivors that I've worked with who are parents their kids are blessed. There's just so much there. And now, if anybody would like to share what stood out to them about Veronica's story or anything that they can take away and learn from.
Veronica, do you mind sharing the name of your book so we can drop it in the chat for people who are interested?
Yes, the name of it is God's Diamond in the Rough, and you can find it on Amazon. And also me, if you want to reach out to me, Rachel and them have my contact information.
There are a lot of people who are saying, thank you for saying sometimes the best thing is to listen. There are a lot of people saying that. Another, that parenting through your own trauma can be so difficult. Thank you for sharing so much.
Margot.
Okay.
Thank
Veronica,
you.
thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing and being here.
Thank you.
Okay, and so now we're going to welcome our fourth and final speaker. Jenny, would you mind unmuting yourself?
Yep, unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for being here, Jenny, and sitting through. Would you mind telling us about a time that you disclosed your assault and what that response was like?
Sure. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who shared their stories tonight. It's, I feel so honored to just be in the room and, a witness to those stories. And I've actually been a facilitator twice for Truth Out Loud, which is a wonderful, wonderful program, and have had the joy of, seeing amazing, brave people tell their stories and share their stories and use those stories as a tool for healing and to help others heal. And it's been an incredible experience. One of the joys of my life and sort of highlights of my professional work. And this is actually the first time that I'm sharing my own stories. So I'm in that role of, usually the student or participant. So so my sexual abuse happened over the course of a year or so. When I was 4 years old, my abuser was a neighbor. Angela talked about the name thing, and it's a big thing for me since I don't have a name. I don't know the name. I remember lots of other details, but that's not something that I remember. One thing I do remember is that he would give me fruit cocktail, which I think I really liked at the time as a sort of special treat. It's not something my mom ever had in the house. But fruit cocktail is a big trigger for me now. I've never eaten it ever since then. And I kind of, the sight of it makes me sick. So so it happened when I was 4. I didn't disclose to anyone until I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, I had sort of carried it with me all those years and had known, kind of what happened, but in some ways had sort of repressed it to the back of my sort of mind and memory. But when I was 12, I started experiencing some issues with sexual harassment from older boys. I developed very early. So when I was 12, I, wore a C cup, and older boys would sit next to me on the bus and, grope me. And I would just sit there silently and not do or say anything about it. And so I think that was a big trigger for me that made me finally really decide that I needed to, reach out to someone. So I was really struggling with, or clearly emerging mental health issues. And, I realized on some level, not a conscious level, but a 12-year-old level, that the trauma and the shame, the abuse was contributing to these issues. And I think I realized on some level that they were making it very difficult for me to even cope with the sort of current things that were going on. So I disclosed to my mother. And unfortunately, her response was a fairly textbook response of what not to say. She told me that there's no way it could have happened, that it wasn't true, that I must have made it up. And just basically just completely shut it down. That it was just not even possible and there was no way. And I was just completely devastated by her response. I had carried this sort of terrible trauma in secret with me for many, many years, for as long as I could remember. And it took me years to get up the courage to tell her. And then when she responded the way she did, I was really despondent. And I genuinely remember worrying that I was crazy, that I actually was making it up, that something was deeply wrong with me, that I was very broken. It really made me question kind of my own sanity and it deeply made me question my ability to like understand my surroundings, to be able to like know, if something was good or bad, if I was making the right decision. It kind of paralyzed me and made me feel very like I couldn't trust myself. And after that day, I didn't tell anyone else about the abuse for years. So I think the impact of her response in many ways was as traumatic and significant as the actual abuse itself. And from the ages of 12 to 16, I continued to struggle with mental health issues, both from the completely untreated trauma and also from my mother's response. And during that time, I had several other instances of sexual trauma where men that I babysat for when I was 13 or 14 or 15, would kiss me, grope me, ask me to have sex with them, do other inappropriate things. And those instances were always very upsetting to me. I also disclosed those instances to my mother, and she was very sympathetic that was, upsetting and not okay. But she communicated to me that there really was nothing that could be done about it. And that I shouldn't even stop babysitting for those families, but just do my best to avoid being alone with the men, which I've tried and sometimes failed. So she did ask me after the second time that I disclosed to her that something had happened, if I was maybe doing something to encourage it. I think I was 14. So when I was 16, I think it, really reached a crisis where I was frankly just desperate for help. And I, felt at the time, and looking back, I think it's fairly accurate to say that I had almost no tools available to get myself that help or to even advocate for myself. So I cut both of my wrists. That seemed like the best option in the moment. And it seemed like the only choice that I had. I just felt completely helpless and powerless. And I had, in some ways been trained that, you were powerless, that people would do things to you that you didn't want them to do, and that there was really nothing you could do about it. So obviously I didn't die. I do still have lovely scars on my wrist, which I'm always very self-conscious about. And also at the time, I was super devastated to learn that I wasn't going to die from my cuts that I had made on my wrist, because I discovered that I made them the wrong way. So even though I gave myself pretty severe cuts, like I said, I still have scars and I needed stitches, I didn't bleed very much because I made them, this way and not this way. And I remember feeling like a complete failure that I had even just done such a poor job, trying to end my life, and that it had failed so spectacularly. So obviously that was a really difficult experience, but ultimately it was my first real step on my journey to healing. It was the first thing that it was a long road. It was not like that was a great experience that led me to great counselors who got me the help I needed or anything, but it was the first time that I did, do counseling and started on that process. And I've been on that road and that journey ever since. So, clearly almost any response I think would have been better than my mother's. And it would have been, anything would have been more supportive and helpful. It might surprise people to learn that I am very close with my mom still to this day. We I think have a good relationship. I don't hold too much anger or resentment towards her about her behaviors. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel more of that. But at the time, my household that I grew up in was a very difficult, chaotic household. My father was incredibly emotionally abusive and sometimes physically abusive, especially to my mother. He was an alcoholic. He was incredibly controlling of her on a level that is kind of hard for people outside of our household to fathom. And she just was really limited, I think, in her abilities to sort of respond. And then I later learned as an adult that she, of course, had experienced her own traumas that had contributed to her shame about letting these things happen to me. And it was really that shame that had driven her response. She could not face the reality that she had failed to protect me, and that she had let these things happen to her daughter. And so, the only thing that she could kind of do was just deny and, push them away. And I think she dealt with her own very deep-seated feelings of powerlessness, particularly in the face of male violence. So, but really what her failed response and the way it compounded my trauma shows to me is the responsibility that someone faces when someone discloses sexual violence or abuse to them, and the role that they can play, either positive or negative, in helping that person get help. I only told one person until I tried to kill myself. That was it. Like I didn't tell anyone else. And when that person failed me, I didn't try again. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell my brothers. I never told a friend. I never told a teacher. I never told a trusted adult. Don't know that I had any trusted adults, but, I picked the one person that I felt was the best bet, my mom, or was close to. And, I relied on her. And when she didn't help me, that was the end of the road for me. There was no other options. There was no hope that someone else out there was going to help me. So, I think it just shows how important it is when someone does disclose to you, you're their person. You might be the only person that they tell about this. It's a lot of responsibility, I think, but I think it's a lot of power to do good and to help them in that moment. And, I think it also shows how important it is to deal with your own trauma so that you can be in a position to help and support others when they need it. Unfortunately, my mother never dealt with her own trauma and still has not to this day. She's never gone to counseling, and she never really did anything to heal from the things that had happened to her. And so it's not really surprising that she was so ill-equipped to help me in those moments. But that's how cycles of abuse get perpetuated through families and through communities over the course of generations, because survivors haven't learned the tools that they need to heal and cope with their own abuse. They don't have those tools to offer future generations. So it just continues. So that's one cycle that I'm in. I'm working very hard to stop. I work on my own trauma and my own healing. And frankly, it's very hard for me to do things for myself. I have a lot of issues around shame and things that make it hard for me to take care of myself. But that's something that I'm very committed to, in large part so that I can be the person that breaks that cycle, so that if my daughter or my son ever come to me, I will be equipped with the tools to help them. And I, already try to give them all the tools that I can. People at Stardo, I told my children since they were, toddlers, you're in charge of your body. If teachers tell my daughter or my son now, your hair's too long, you need a haircut, we tell them, like, you can tell them I'm in charge of my body. I get to decide how long my hair is, right? So, we're very committed to this. So, it's my hope in life that I never, ever, ever have to help them through anything like this, or they never need me to play that role. But I want to be ready if they do, and I want to be someone who can help them. And I'll just say, I taught for a while. I was an academic, and I taught at a healthcare college, and I taught, future healthcare workers. And I used to talk to them about, working with people or helping people when they're going through trauma, when they're going through grief, when they're going through pain. There is nothing that you can say as a nurse or a counselor or anybody in one of those roles in that moment that will make it better. Nothing can make it better, but you can make it worse. And so your job is not to make it worse, right? And it's hard. But I think that's a good goal.
Jenny, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know the chat is already going off and I'll summarize some in a moment, but I just want to say thank you for, stepping off from facilitating to sharing your own story, and doing that for the first time. I'm honored to be in this space when I can hear that story. And so thank you. And I think that we could probably have a whole other webinar talking about the cycle of abuse, and just generational trauma and what that looks like for all sorts of different people. And I heard Veronica speaking to that as well, and just talking about, I think a lot of people who shared tonight are parents, and just what that means for working through your own trauma and then, raising a new generation. And I think that's something that we talk a lot about here as well, and thinking about what's happened at LSU recently, and just how do we make a foundation that's better. And that's, ultimately our goal is to figure out what we can do next. And so in the chat box, someone said, it really resonates with me that you have been able to recognize that your mom needed that grace and you were able to give it to her. That's amazing. Audrey shared, you might be that one person is an important takeaway. And that kind of segues into our next section, where Rachel is going to kind of give a guideline for just some ways to support a survivor when they do disclose. And Jenny kind of really spoke to this, where oftentimes the first person that a survivor shares their experience with can make such a big impact. So Rachel.
Thank you so much to everyone. Jenny, I just wrote down, nothing can make it better, but you can definitely make it worse. That is amazing. Love that. Love that quote. Okay, everyone. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for everyone that's shared. The chat has been overwhelmingly supportive, loving. I've teared up a few times. I have a frog in my throat. But I am going to spend about 5 minutes just sharing with you some tips. And Alexis, can people see my screen? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to run through just 5 tips for responding to sexual trauma, just to echo some of the things that the survivors who've shared tonight have said, and really hoping that you'll leave with a couple of tools in your toolbox, so that when someone comes to you and discloses, that you feel more prepared and more comfortable with what to say. So the first thing is that language is important. And like so many have explained today, you could be that one person that someone discloses to. And the way you address a survivor and what happened to them is going to indicate whether or not you're going to be supportive. And so when you're, am I going here? Sorry, trying to press enter. It's not happening. So you want to say things like, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You're not alone. This was not your fault. I'm here for you. And you want to stay away from anything that might indicate judgment. So, when we're hearing someone's story and witnessing the trauma they've experienced, as Veronica said, the best thing you can do is listen and indicate, with your body language or with supportive words, that you're ready to receive that information. And the worst thing you can do is question them and say, well, why did you wear that? Or why did you go there? Or why were you out drinking on Bourbon Street? Or what did you do to send the wrong signal to that person? Are you sure this happened the way that you're describing it? And what we know, doing this work, just as Jenny mentioned, is a lot of times that denial can come from a place of their own shame, of the person's own shame, or just not wanting to believe the magnitude of what you're telling them. These things are so heavy, and it's such an ugly truth in our society that children are sexually abused, or that people go through years, decades of being molested or physically abused. And so, we really have to prepare ourselves to just listen without judgment and never do anything that's going to trigger shame or self-blame, because we know survivors are already struggling with it. Any question that comes up for you has already played to the survivor's mind 100 times. they're already asking themselves, why did I do that? Or why didn't I do this? Why didn't I fight back? Or why didn't I tell someone? What they need from you is support and supportive messages. The second thing is to believe them openly and vocally. Survivors often worry that they will not be believed, and everything in our culture sort of reinforces that. We see victim blaming comments online, or just like many of the people I've shared tonight, even people in their own families, didn't want to believe or didn't think it could happen to them. Even if you don't think the survivor needs to hear it, just say it. I believe you. I believe what happened, because they're already thinking that person is not going to believe me. They're already thinking, how could this have happened to me? Sometimes survivors themselves have trouble believing. Just like Angela mentioned, she didn't talk about it for over 30 years, tried to forget it, tried to think it's never going to happen again. It's never going to come out. I'm never going to tell anyone. But we know that, people are carrying this shame around for years. And so when a survivor feels believed, you've already started helping them heal. The third thing is identify resources. Surviving sexual assault is such an overwhelmingly traumatic experience. And as many of the survivors shared tonight, it's really the aftermath of the assault that's the most messy and stressful and overwhelming part. And so if you're a person that's hearing and witnessing a survivor's story, you can help them by identifying resources. And the best place to start is at a local sexual assault center. And if you're not from our area, which Angela mentioned earlier, we serve New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Alexandria. If anywhere you Google, you can look at the National Sexual Violence Resource Center and type in your city or your zip code, and they'll show you where the local center is. So that's a great place to start. The fourth thing is empower them. Survivors' power has been taken away when someone violates them. And it's really our job to help them understand you have power, and I'm here to help you reclaim your power. And be supportive of their decisions. Every survivor is different. What justice looks like to them is different. What they need at any given moment is different. And Jenny, again, I love that, nothing you say can make it better, but everything, something can absolutely make it worse, And so sometimes survivors might feel pressure to report to the police, or they might feel pressure to tell the authorities, tell someone on campus. But we know that once a survivor does report, they're going to be asked a ton of questions by people that are strangers to them. It's many of us in society don't feel comfortable talking about positive sexual experiences. Imagine sitting in front of someone, an authority figure like a law enforcement officer, and telling the worst sexual experience of your life and feeling traumatized and worrying that they don't believe you and having them pepper you with questions. It's part of the process, but it's incredibly re-traumatizing. So by helping a survivor, remind them, understand what's best for them. Don't decide for them, don't push them or pressure them to do anything, but just be there for them and help them think it through. Survivors get to decide what justice looks like. Sometimes it's reporting and sometimes it's not. There are real safety concerns for some survivors, especially if you're living in a household with your abuser, if they're a parent, a grandparent, if there's someone that has close contact with you. Disclosing and that person doesn't believe you, you could be in greater danger. So there are plenty of things and reasons why survivors might not report. And I do want to mention, we're saying don't pressure them to report, but of course, if it's a minor, we do have mandated reporting laws. So if anybody discloses as a child to you under the age of 18, we absolutely think you should report to the police. And if it's a family member or household member, to the Department of Children and Family Services. You can also call STAR. We're also mandated reporters. A couple of other things that survivors get to decide is if and when they want to talk about the assault, who they want to tell about the assault, what care they need, when they are ready for therapy or other supportive services, and then what support looks like for them. Really, they're the driver of their own healing, and we're here to support them in whatever they need. And sometimes that looks really messy. You know, sometimes survivors, in order to deal with the trauma, they've got maladaptive coping skills. They might turn to drugs or drinking. They might try to harm themselves. And we want to gently help them through that, but recognize that that's all a consequence and a result of their trauma. And finally, and maybe one of the biggest things I want you to take away, is to challenge victim blaming. This is the most harmful thing that survivors witness, and survivors are constantly triggered and re-traumatized by public comments that place blame on victims, that shame them, that ask questions, that hold them in the court of public opinion, and tear them down and try to diminish their credibility. So we really want everyone here to be an ally and challenge those harmful comments. You know, you've seen them on social media threads saying they were asking for it. Well, why did they go home with that person? Well, they were drunk. Why did they get drunk? Probably because we like alcohol, right? It's probably just regretted sex. Look at what they were wearing. What did they expect to happen? And they probably just want to get revenge by crying rape, or they're trying to get media attention, or they're trying to get money from an institution or from a perpetrator. It takes an incredible amount of courage for a survivor to tell their story. They don't know who's going to judge them and who's going to believe them. People don't just blatantly report falsely. People don't do that. The statistics are so small. Consistently, in studies that are done by the FBI and by reputable peer-reviewed journals, are that 2%, just like any other crime, 2% of rapes are considered false reports. So we know this is something that we have to believe. We have to believe. Take every opportunity you can to challenge these comments and attitudes. And I mean direct messaging people on social media, putting that comment as a reply right under theirs. Let's place the blame where it should be, on the person that is committing the violence. We don't do enough of that. Now, to close us out, we're going to use a little fun tool called Mentimeter. And there's a code at the top of the screen. If you go to the website and enter the numbers in your phone, you can share with us and it'll pop up on the screen. What word or phrase will you take from tonight? Whatever you want to share. And I can't see it because I'm sharing my screen. Oh, there we go. So menti.com, use the code 63901929. Great words: empowered, listen, believe, resilience. That's a great one. Strength. Nothing can make it better, but you can make it worse. I'm glad we have that. Yes. United, thriver, listen, grace. Cycles, absolutely. The generational trauma, healing, activist, voice. Thank you all for sharing that word or phrase. And using Mentimeter again, how are you going to apply what you've learned to your future interactions with survivor? This is our last question. And I know we've covered a lot today. But just think about when someone discloses to you. And it might be a subtle disclosure, you know, and as Audrey mentioned when she started, the media attention, specifically with this campus sexual assault stuff happening, you know, STAR's phones are ringing off the hook. We have experienced a 50% increase in calls in the past 3 months. We know that this media attention is triggering people. Same thing happened during the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, as Angela mentioned. We know that when this is in the media, survivors are going to relate and they're going to feel alone and they want to reach out. So we know that this is going to continue to increase, and you might hear it. You might be the one. Even just sharing on social media that you came to this event, people might direct message you. So some great ones: listen, absolutely. And I would add to that, listen without judgment. There are no textbook responses. Totally. Just listen and make space for them. Turn toward, not away. Hold space, listen, and respond supportively. So thank you guys for joining us. Use my job to help more and have almost events like this. Almost events or more events? We should have more events like this. I was very touched by everyone. So what I want to leave you with is thank you for joining us. And we do have a major fundraising campaign going on for STAR. We're trying to meet a challenge grant we've received for $150,000. You can donate now any amount, $5, $20. If you text RAPID to 41444, or you can visit our website, star.ngo/donate. This is really something that's going to help us increase our capacity to meet the need right now. As survivors continue to come forward, we never turn any survivor away. And our staff, many of whom are here tonight, are incredible. They're so empathetic, non-judgmental, and really attuned to the needs of survivors. And so if you're not yet a fan, connect with us somehow. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. All of you that attended tonight will be put in our weekly newsletter, so you'll receive content from me with more opportunities like this. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is just one of the events we have going on during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We have a number of other events scheduled, some of which are focused on self-care. We have a virtual yoga, trauma-informed yoga session. We have a dance class here in Baton Rouge. We also have a Kendra Scott Give Back Night during the last week of April. We have a drive-in movie at John Schneider's new lot in Holden showing Sister Act. And we also have a restaurant evening at Beau Soleil here in Baton Rouge. So lots of ways to get involved. Thank you again, everyone, so much for joining. We've reached the end of our event. And Alexis, is there anything you'd like to close us out with?
I just also, again, want to thank our 4 presenters today for sharing their stories, and especially in this virtual format that we're all still trying to figure out. And I know that when I did a presentation the first time, speaking to a lot of empty cameras. So thank you so much for people who were able to keep your cameras on just so that they could see those supportive faces. But thank you all so much. And please check us out on social media to find out more ways to be involved. You can find out about Truth Out Loud that Ginny spoke about. And have a good rest of your evening.